I was at the royal wedding, Charles and Di.
Picture the biggest chair in American television. Johnny Carson sits behind his desk, expecting another polished Hollywood smile. Instead, the curtain opens and out walks chaos. Wild hair standing on end. A cackle that stops the room cold. No gown, no grace, just raw, unstoppable confidence. Carson doesn't flinch away. He leans in. Because the women who broke every beauty rule in Hollywood didn't just make him laugh, they made television history. Tonight we uncover 7 forgotten legends who proved that charm beats perfection every single time. Stay till the end, because the final name on this list will completely change how you see beauty. 1. Sandra Bernhard. She didn't ask for permission. She demanded attention. And in 1988, she walked onto the most powerful stage in television and made Johnny Carson sweat on live TV. Sandra Bernhard was nothing like the guests before her. She had a wide mouth, a sharp gap between her front teeth, and a raw, jagged kind of beauty that refused to apologize for itself. She didn't play cute. She didn't play shy. She played dangerous. When she stepped onto that stage, she moved like she owned it. Long, powerful strides. Tight leather. A gaze that locked onto Carson like a predator sizing up prey. She sat down, crossed her legs, and leaned back with the kind of confidence most people spend a lifetime chasing. Then she leaned forward. Straight into his space. Carson, the man who controlled every conversation on that desk for decades, suddenly lost control. He crossed his arms. He pulled back in his chair. His eyes darted to the audience, searching for an exit that didn't exist. And the crowd loved every second of it. Sandra didn't wait for questions. She hijacked the conversation, steering it into territory no other guest dared touch. She talked about her body, her attraction, her power, with total seriousness. She wasn't joking. She believed every word. Then came the moment nobody forgot. She leaned across that desk, her face inches from his, and said it low and slow. "Johnny, are you afraid of me? Don't worry. I'll be gentle with you." The studio erupted. Carson laughed, but it wasn't his usual laugh. It was nervous. Real. Because for the first time in years, the king of late night wasn't running the show. Here's what made Sandra different from every comedienne before her. Phyllis Diller and Joan Rivers built their fame by mocking their own looks. Sandra did the opposite. She never once apologized for her face, her body, or her presence. She forced the room to accept her exactly as she was, and if you couldn't handle it, that was your problem, not hers. She turned features other people called flaws into a weapon. That gap in her teeth became iconic. That aggressive energy became her signature. She proved that confidence isn't about being liked. It's about being undeniable. Carson later admitted she represented something he couldn't fully understand, a new generation of women who didn't need validation from men in suits behind big desks. She didn't need his approval. She just needed the microphone. Sandra Bernhard walked into that studio and flipped the entire dynamic of late-night television on its head, if only for 8 minutes. And decades later, people still talk about the night she made Johnny Carson visibly nervous, live, in front of millions. That's not an accident. That's power. 2. Carol Channing. Picture eyes so wide open they never seem to blink. A grin stretched ear to ear like a cartoon come to life. A voice so raspy and deep it sounds nothing like the woman standing in front of you. That was Carol Channing, and the moment she walked on stage, she didn't just perform. She transformed into something television had never seen before. She didn't simply walk toward Johnny Carson's desk. She glided, like a wind-up doll brought to life, every movement exaggerated, every gesture theatrical. And before you even saw her fully, you heard her. That deep, gravelly voice cutting through the studio air, completely at odds with her dainty, sparkling appearance. It was jarring. It was unforgettable. When she sat down beside Carson, she never leaned back like a typical guest. She leaned in, pushing her face close to his, giving him a front-row seat to her most famous features. Heavily painted eyes, opened impossibly wide, as if she refused to ever blink. Bright red lips stretched into an enormous smile, revealing teeth so white and perfect they looked almost unreal. Carson used to say talking to her felt less like sitting across from a person and more like sitting across from a character who had escaped straight out of a cartoon. One night, curiosity got the better of him. He leaned toward her and asked, completely serious, if she ever actually saw her own eyelids. Carol didn't miss a beat. She let out a booming laugh that shook her platinum wig, leaned close to his ear, and answered in that unmistakable growl. She kept her eyes wide open, she said, just so she could see his handsome face clearly. The room lost it. That was the magic of Carol Channing. She didn't hide behind subtlety. She amplified everything, her expressions, her voice, her presence, until she became larger than life itself. She'd bring her own strange homemade snacks onto the show and hand them to Carson live on air, watching with those saucer-wide eyes as he forced down a bite, visibly regretting every second of it. What looked unusual to everyone else wasn't a flaw to Carol. It was a strategy. She understood something most performers never grasp: memorable beats beautiful every single time. Her face became her greatest prop. Her voice became her signature. Her refusal to blend in became the exact reason audiences couldn't look away. Carson called those moments some of the most surreal exchanges of his entire career, and decades later, that's exactly why we still remember her. Not because she followed the rules of Hollywood glamour, but because she rewrote them entirely, one wide-eyed, wide-grinned appearance at a time. 3. Totie Fields. She wasn't slim. She wasn't shy. And she definitely wasn't interested in fitting into Hollywood's idea of beautiful. Totie Fields walked onto that stage and made it clear within seconds, she wasn't there to be judged. She was there to judge everyone else. It was the late 1960s, and American television was drowning in thin waists and long legs. Then Totie Fields showed up like a direct slap to that entire aesthetic. Barely over 4.5 feet tall but overwhelmingly full of presence, she strutted out in high heels, her whole body shaking with every step, a giant smile plastered across her face despite having none of the so-called refined features Hollywood demanded. When she reached Carson's desk, the chair suddenly looked too small to hold her. She sat down, adjusted her always too tight dress, and locked eyes with him. She didn't wait to be asked the question. She attacked first. She looked Carson up and down, his slim frame wrapped in an expensive suit, and curled her lip in total disdain. In her eyes, he was too thin. Too fragile. Not nearly enough man to appreciate a real woman like her. Carson, a man used to being fawned over by every beauty in Hollywood, suddenly found himself the target. And Totie wasn't subtle about it. She flirted with him openly, right there on national television, but there was nothing shy about it. She was in complete control. Then came the line that brought the entire studio to its knees. She patted her large frame, looked Carson dead in the eye, and told him those skinny models were only good for looking at. She was the one who'd actually keep him warm through winter. The audience roared. Carson turned red, laughing so hard he could barely speak, pretending to wipe sweat off his forehead. He was completely outmatched, and everyone in that room knew it. What made Totie unforgettable wasn't just the comedy. It was the fact that she never once treated her size or her looks as something to apologize for. She treated it as leverage. She taught an entire generation that charm has nothing to do with matching a measuring tape and everything to do with owning the room the second you walk into it. Even in her final years, after losing a leg to complications from illness, she came back to that same stage in a wheelchair and she was still Totie. Still cutting Carson down. Still demanding laughter instead of pity. That's the kind of presence that doesn't fade with time. That's the kind of presence people build entire legacies on. 4. Ruth Buzzy. She could walk into a room as a stunning, mature Italian beauty, and within seconds, transform into something completely different. No costume change. No trip backstage. Just a hunch of the shoulders, a drop of the smile, and a squint of the eyes. That was Ruth Buzzy, and that transformation was pure genius. Off camera, Ruth was charming, polished, exactly what you'd expect from a Hollywood actress. But the moment Johnny Carson mentioned her famous character, everything changed instantly, right in front of the audience. She'd hunch her back, slump her shoulders, drag her smile into a cranky pout, and squint with suspicion. In an instant, the seductive woman vanished, replaced by a disheveled, surly old lady who looked like she'd wandered into the wrong building entirely. The signature prop was a hairnet, cheap, thin netting pulled tight over her scalp, killing any hint of bounce or sexiness. Paired with drab, outdated clothing, she became the walking embodiment of surrender. Surrendered beauty. Surrendered femininity. She'd sit in that luxurious guest chair looking as out of place as someone who'd stumbled into an elite party by mistake. But don't mistake the costume for weakness. That character had a killer instinct hiding underneath the hairnet. Carson would lean in playfully, tossing out some cheesy compliment expecting a shy smile in return. Instead he'd get a stare sharp enough to cut glass and a dismissive toss of the chin, like he was something that needed to be dealt with immediately. One night Carson finally asked her directly. Why would a beautiful woman choose to disappear inside something so unglamorous? Ruth dropped the act for a moment, smiled, and gave him the real answer. That hairnet, that handbag, they weren't a costume. They were armor. Inside that character, she could say anything, do anything, things a conventionally beautiful woman on television would never be allowed to get away with. That was the secret nobody talked about. Ugliness wasn't a limitation for her. It was freedom. It stripped away every expectation Hollywood placed on women and let her exist purely for the laugh, with zero filter and zero apology. Carson admitted he never had the nerve to do something like that himself. Pride wouldn't allow it. And that's exactly why he respected her so much. She proved that real artistry sometimes means throwing your ego and your vanity straight into the trash, hiding it under a $2 hairnet, and letting the character do whatever it takes to get the laugh. Decades later, that grumpy old character is still remembered as one of the sharpest, boldest disguises in television history. Not because it was pretty. Because it was fearless. 5. Phyllis Diller. A curtain opens, and the audience expects elegance. Instead, out steps a woman with bleached blonde hair standing straight up, like she'd just grabbed a live wire, and a cackle so wild it made grown men flinch. That entrance alone was enough to stop the room cold. That was Phyllis Diller, and she didn't walk on the stage to be admired. She walked on to detonate every rule Hollywood ever wrote about beauty. While other guests floated out in elegant gowns and soft perfume, Diller's arrival felt like a visual explosion. A baggy sack dress covered in bizarre patterns. Clunky boots. An absurdly long cigarette holder gripped in one hand like a prop from another planet. Her face was heavy with makeup, but not to enhance anything. It was there to exaggerate every flaw, smeared eyeliner, teeth bared to the max with every laugh, building that unmistakable, jarring cackle that became her signature. Carson, always sharp in his tailored suit, genuinely wouldn't know whether to shake her hand or take a step back. Guiding her to her seat felt like escorting someone who just landed off a broomstick, except somehow, impossibly likable. And once she sat down, she never waited to be mocked. She got there first, every single time. While other actresses spent their whole careers hiding wrinkles and extra weight, Diller put hers on full display, almost proudly. One night Carson, half joking, asked what her beauty secret was. She looked him dead in the eye and said she'd just spent 7 hours at the salon, and that was only for the estimate. The studio lost it completely. Carson doubled over laughing, banging his pencil on the desk, his signature tell whenever something truly caught him off guard. That's when it clicked for him. Her so-called ugliness wasn't a flaw. It was a weapon, aimed directly at a Hollywood industry obsessed with surface-level perfection. She'd talk about her fictional husband trembling in fear every morning when she removed her makeup, or mirrors shattering the second she looked into them. Delivered completely deadpan, paired with a face that seemed almost elastic with expression, it was impossible not to laugh. Carson stopped seeing her as unattractive. He started seeing her as something rarer, a woman radiant in a way no beauty queen could ever fake. In an era where women were expected to be quiet, gentle, and picture-perfect, Phyllis Diller chose the opposite. Loud. Chaotic. Unapologetically herself. And it was exactly that fearlessness that turned her into a legend, one wild cackle at a time. Roseanne Barr. No pristine hair. No perfect apron. No fake smile plastered on for the cameras. Roseanne Barr walked onto that stage looking like she'd just rushed home from the grocery store, and within seconds, she tore apart everything television told women they had to be. It was 1985, and American TV was flooded with images of the perfect housewife, hairstyled, apron spotless, always smiling while baking something for a husband and kids who never once messed up her day. Then Roseanne showed up like a bucket of cold water thrown straight at that fantasy. Short. Stocky. Hair cut close and left completely disheveled, like she'd forgotten it existed that morning. Baggy, rustic clothes that looked built for cleaning a kitchen, not walking a national stage. When she stepped up to the microphone, she didn't try to charm anyone. She just stood there, bored, tired, and let her voice do the damage. That nasal, moaning, complaint-soaked tone became instantly recognizable. She called herself a domestic goddess, and the irony landed every single time. She complained about a lazy husband. Naughty kids. The endless grind of cleaning a house nobody appreciated. Carson doubled over laughing the moment she delivered her flat, deadpan verdict on parenting. If the kids were still breathing when her husband got home, she'd done her job. The crowd exploded. And Carson realized something in that moment. Roseanne didn't need beauty. Her power came from being brutally, unapologetically real. She spoke for every woman exhausted from performing perfection. She stood on that stage with zero makeup, messy hair, and said flat out that being a housewife was miserable. And people didn't just laugh, they related. When she sat across from Carson, she didn't flatter him or soften herself for the cameras. She flopped into the chair, let out a long, exhausted sigh, like she'd just dropped 1,000 pounds off her shoulders. Carson saw every wrinkle, every imperfection, and instead of looking away, he leaned in. In a world full of plastic, polished performers, Roseanne felt like an actual human being. One night Carson asked her the secret to a happy marriage. She looked at him, unimpressed, and delivered the line without missing a beat. Just don't kill each other. Carson laughed so hard he had to grab a handkerchief. That was her genius. She never asked to be seen as the king's equal. She treated him like a clumsy husband who needed a serious lesson in reality, and audiences couldn't get enough of it. Roseanne proved something television desperately needed to hear. Perfection is boring. It's the mess, the complaints, the exhaustion, the total honesty, that actually makes people unforgettable. 7. Joan Rivers. She didn't walk onto that stage. She lunged onto it, like she was running from disaster, hands flying, shoulders hunched, desperation written across her face before she said a single word. That was Joan Rivers in the mid-1960s, and nobody in Hollywood had ever seen anything quite like her. This wasn't the tight-faced, glossy icon people would recognize decades later. This was raw. Unfiltered. A long face. A sharp, rugged nose. Eyes lined heavy enough to look permanently anxious. She had a very ordinary kind of look by Hollywood's brutal standards, and instead of hiding it, she built her entire act around it. Sitting across from Carson, she never once sat still. She fidgeted constantly, leaned in too close, sometimes slammed her hand on the desk just to punch up a punchline. And where other guests built characters around confidence, Joan built hers around desperation. She wasn't there to prove she was funny despite her looks. She was there to prove she was funny because of them. She complained that nobody looked at her twice. She joked about her own parents' disappointment the day she was born, ugly, in her own words. In every exchange, Carson played the calm, composed gentleman, the impossible dream she'd never actually catch. she'd stare at him with a kind of exaggerated hunger and ask, dead serious, whether a man like him would ever date someone like her. When Carson gave a noncommittal answer, Joan would howl, yanking at her own hair in a mix of real joy and fake agony. That contrast, his calm against her manic energy, became pure television gold. She taught an entire generation something nobody expected. If you're not conventionally beautiful, don't hide from it. Turn it into the sharpest weapon you own, and use it to take shots at a world obsessed with looking perfect. That's exactly what she did, night after night. She wasn't chasing sympathy. She was building an empire out of self-deprecation, one brutally honest joke at a time. What started as a small Jewish girl in a simple black dress, mocking her own reflection for laughs, eventually became one of the most influential voices in comedy history. Carson never forgot those early years with her, the manic energy, the desperate charm, the sheer audacity to say what nobody else dared to say about themselves on national television. Joan Rivers proved that vulnerability, when weaponized with confidence, doesn't just get laughs. It builds legacies.